Right now, nearly 3,800 meters beneath the surface of the Atlantic Ocean, the most famous ship in history is slowly disappearing. More than 100 years ago, the Titanic sank to the bottom of the Atlantic, and ever since that night, she has never returned to the surface. In this video, you'll discover why humanity still can't bring the Titanic back, what is destroying the ship at this very moment,
Deep below the ocean, where almost no human has ever been.
why some scientists believe that within just a few decades, there may be almost nothing left of her, and why the greatest obstacle isn't a lack of modern technology. At first, the answer seems obvious. The Titanic is simply too deep. She rests nearly 3,800 meters below the surface, where the pressure is more than 350 times greater than at sea level,
Where sunlight never reaches.
where the water remains just above freezing, and where humans can only survive inside specially designed deep-sea submersibles. But here's what makes this story so fascinating. Humanity has walked on the moon. We've sent robotic explorers to Mars. We've built submersibles capable of reaching the deepest parts of the ocean. We've recovered aircraft from the seafloor. We've raised submarines. We've even lifted enormous shipwrecks. So why not the Titanic? What makes this ship so different? In 1985, oceanographer Robert Ballard finally located the Titanic after 73 years of searching. The world expected to find a ship frozen in time. Instead, researchers discovered something completely different. The hull had broken into two massive sections. Thousands of artifacts were scattered across the seabed. Suitcases, shoes, dishes, pieces of steel. It looked less like a ship, and more like the remains of an entire world, preserved in darkness. But what shocked researchers the most was that the Titanic wasn't simply resting on the ocean floor. She was disappearing, year after year, little by little. And that discovery led to one question people are still asking today. If we know exactly where the Titanic is, why is she still on the ocean floor? If you ask most people why the Titanic is still resting on the ocean floor, you'll usually hear the same answer. She's simply too heavy. And at first, that sounds reasonable. When the Titanic began her maiden voyage, she was one of the largest ships ever built. She measured nearly 269 meters in length and had a gross tonnage of more than 52,000 tons. But surprisingly, her weight is not the biggest problem. In fact, if the Titanic had sunk in shallow water, she probably would have been raised decades ago. The real challenge begins where sunlight disappears, nearly 3,800 meters below the surface. Down there, the ocean is almost completely dark. The water remains just above freezing, and the pressure exceeds 350 times the pressure at sea level. To put that into perspective, every square centimeter is being crushed by a force of more than 350 kilograms. No ordinary machine could survive those conditions. Even the world's most advanced deep-sea submersibles can only stay there for a limited time. Every expedition requires years of planning, costs millions of dollars, and carries enormous risks. But even that isn't the biggest obstacle. Over the past century, the ocean has been quietly changing the Titanic. The steel that once made her one of the strongest ships ever built has become incredibly fragile. Her hull is now covered with strange formations that look like rust-colored icicles. Scientists call them rusticles. They are created by bacteria that feed on iron. In other words, the ocean is slowly eating the ship alive, day after day, year after year. Every new expedition reveals the same heartbreaking reality. The Titanic is disappearing. Entire sections of the decks have already collapsed. Cabins that were once clearly visible have vanished. Large parts of the ship continue to weaken. Engineers believe that the wreck has become so fragile that trying to lift it could destroy it completely. The ship might break apart long before it ever leaves the seabed. But even if one day humanity develops the technology to recover the Titanic safely, there is still another question. Perhaps we shouldn't raise her at all. And that is where the greatest debate truly begins. But Let's imagine that one day humanity develops the technology to safely raise the Titanic. Should we actually do it? That question has divided historians, archaeologists, engineers, and researchers for decades. To some, the Titanic is an irreplaceable historical artifact, a chance to learn even more about one of the greatest maritime disasters in history. But to others, she is much more than a shipwreck. She is the final resting place of more than 1,500 people. For many families, the Titanic is a maritime grave. That is why many experts believe she should remain exactly where she is, undisturbed, out of respect for those who never returned home. But time is running out. Every year, the ocean claims another piece of the ship. The steel continues to weaken. Decks collapse. Details that were clearly visible just a few years ago have already disappeared. Researchers believe that within the next few decades, large parts of the Titanic may be gone forever. Some scientists have even compared the Titanic to a melting glacier, not because it is disappearing quickly, but because every expedition reveals changes that can never be reversed. Doorways that once stood intact have collapsed. Railings that survived for more than a century have fallen away. Entire sections of the wreck continue to weaken. In other words, the Titanic that researchers see today is not the same Titanic they explored 20 years ago. It may look completely different again. That is exactly why every expedition has become so important. Each new dive may be the last opportunity to document parts of the ship before they disappear forever. That is why modern expeditions have changed their mission. Their goal is no longer to raise the ship. Instead, they are racing against time to preserve it digitally. Using advanced sonar, high-resolution photography, and incredibly detailed 3D scans. So, even if the ocean eventually destroys the Titanic, its story and every possible detail can still survive. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson the Titanic has left us. We often believe that modern technology can solve any problem, but sometimes nature reminds us that there are still places beyond our control, and the deep ocean is one of them. But perhaps the biggest mystery of the Titanic is not only what happened on that cold night in 1912. It is what her remains will tell future generations, when we are no longer able to see them ourselves. For more than a century, the Titanic has rested in the darkness of the Atlantic, not because we don't know where she is, and not because we have stopped exploring her, but because the ocean has slowly made her part of itself, and perhaps that is where she will remain forever.